Hello, I'm Daniel.omorain. This is a series that I put together for YouTube called Deck Plates. The reason why I call it Deck Plates is because, I was in the Navy, and the deck plates are where the work is actually done. So let's say it's the lowest level of labor, where the stuff actually gets done. So I've been monitoring for about 10 years. And I have some things that I want to share, things that I've learned along the way. This might be good for especially new people, but older people might get some tidbits out of this. So what I'm going to talk about today is preparing for the ongoing monitoring visit. Some sponsors refer to this visit as the interim, but it's basically your monitoring visit. So I prepare a lot for the monitoring visits because what I've learned over time is that in order to write a good report, you have to conduct a good visit. And in order to conduct a good visit, you have to prepare well for the visit. So I do put a lot of time into preparation. My dog is down here. He's squirming around. It's easy to conduct a sort of a perfunctory monitoring visit and write a perfunctory report. I'm not comfortable doing that. I like to do it as well as I can. So anyway, this is how I prepare for monitoring visit. So the big sections are data, IWRS, pharmacy, CTMS, and the goals for the visit. There's some other sections that are sort of parenthetical, but those are the main sections. So what I'll do is I'll talk about those sections first. That's probably about half of the preparation, and then the other stuff is sort of done if time permits. So I'm going to start out with data management. So the first thing I do is go into the portal. Most recently I've used Inform, which I like because I'm familiar with it. There are a few things I like about it. One, it's easy to generate reports. Another thing is called listings, which I'll talk to you in a minute here. So the first thing I do is I go into the portal and I run a report for all of the CRF pages, some people call them forms, that have been completed but not as CRF verified. So listen, in the industry there's a term, initialism, CRF, SDV, source data verification. My thinking is that you cannot verify the source. You can verify the CRF because you can compare the CRF to the source to see if it makes sense, see if they're the same. But can we actually verify the source? Is there any way that we can verify that the blood pressure was actually 120/70? No, we can't. So we have to accept that what is in the source is true, and we cannot verify the source. So I call it CRF verification. So anyway, I go into Inform and I run a report for all the CRF pages that have been completed but not verified. The second thing I do in the portal, in the data management portal, is something that I think is very important, that I know that most of my colleagues and peers do not do. Probably because they don't know that the software has a capability, or the portal. And this is what is called listings. So I've worked on two different kinds of software, Inform, and I forgot the other one, but both of them, the people are able to run, the sponsor people are able to run something called listings. And basically listings are an ability to extract data from subjects for selective pieces of data. And any data that's captured in the CRF, you can run a listing for. So what I run listings for are adverse events, ConMeds, and medical history. So for the adverse events, what I want to get out of that is a couple things. Typically, when I run the report, I can find out what SAEs have happened. And I want to know that because that's going to take a lot of time at the visit, and I want to make sure that the site has submitted it appropriately, either to the IRB or to if faxing is required, to do the faxing. The second thing is the most important thing, though, or more important thing, I think, and that is that when I start reviewing the subject's source, I look closely for two things: adverse events and ConMeds. So when I see an adverse event or a ConMed in the source, I want to know whether it's in the CRF, and I want to do that quickly. So the way I can do it is by checking the listing. So the listing will have all of the adverse events that the site staff has reported for all the subjects, all of the ConMeds, and all the medical history. So I, as a monitor, think that what we have to do are the things that only we can do. No one else in the chain of command will be able to say, "Hey Dan, did your site ever report that right lower quadrant pain?" No, because they don't know that what right lower quadrant pain happened. Only we do. So we have to do that. Other people can capture things like, "Hey Dan, did you capture the deviation for the missed UA?" Or, "Dan, we're looking at the radiology and the subject has progressed. Make sure the subject comes off the study." Someone else will keep track of that. But only we know whether all of the adverse events and ConMeds have been captured. The other thing that monitors have to do very well, because we're the only people who can do it, is to make sure that the consenting is done properly. And I'll get to that on a different Tech Plates session. So, listings for adverse events, ConMeds, medical history. So when I go through the source, if I see a drug, I want to make sure the drug is captured. And if it's not, I'll write a query. And I have to find out the indication for that drug. Why was the subject taking that drug? Sometimes you can sort of figure it out intuitively, sometimes not. But you have to figure out why the subject was taking it, and either that, the reason would be a adverse event or a medical history. So you have to make sure that it's captured. All right, so staying in data management, the other thing I'll look in there for is queries that the site staff has answered, but I need to close. Sometimes those queries can be closed remotely from my office. Sometimes I need to look at the source. When I write queries, I try to make it a no-brainer for the subject to answer. And I want to make it so when they do answer it, I can hopefully close it remotely. So when I write the query, I am very specific about what I'm talking about. I will say something like, in Dr. Jones's April 13th progress note, on page 2, he refers to the subject taking Tylenol for a severe headache, but I don't see that adverse event in the CRF. Please consider adding it. So when the site responds to the query and they put in the headache, I can close it remotely. The worst kind of query is that the site doesn't know what you're talking about and they can't answer it and you can't close it. So a bad query would be the cycle 3 note from the doctor has adverse events that are not captured on the CRF. Really? What are they going to do with that? Then they have to go find out what the deuce you're talking about and probably either email you or give you some sort of not very helpful response to a query. So anyway, write your query so it helps you and the site, because it's a team. Another thing I want to check is how many queries there are open that the site still needs to close. If there are a bunch of them, before the visit starts, I'm going to write to the steps coordinator and say, hey, you've got these queries, please address them. So what I do, I'm pretty good at these vendor portals, and I can generate the reports that I want. So I'll run this queries report, and then I'll sort it some way that's meaningful to help the site figure out what is most important. So some queries are written by the people who are involved in SAEs, pharmacovigilance. And depending on how they identify themselves, I'll say, please respond to the safety queries first. Or if the report includes how old the query is, I'll say, please answer the old queries first, and then I'll sort the queries with the oldest ones on top. So one thing I want to do is communicate to the site staff, I will help you with your problems. I want to be a part of the solution, because if I just dump stuff on them, they probably won't be responsive to answering my questions or my problems, and I want them to be. I want them to help me, and I want them to know that I will help them when they need it. Alrighty, another thing I do in data management is I figure out whether all of the CRF pages that I expect to have been completed happen. So obviously I need to know what subject visits have happened, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. It's a little bit labor intensive, but I want to know what subject visits have happened and if those CRF pages have been completed. What's the last one here? Okay, so that's it for data. The next big thing is IWRS. And there are two sections of IWRS that are helpful to us. One has to do with subjects, and the other has to do with the study drug. So I go into the IWRS portal, and these are the things that I look for. I want to know what subjects have been consented, because I am going to create a monitoring tool for every subject. And so I want that tool to be constructed before I get to the visit. What else here for subjects? So I'll run a report of the visits that the subjects had had, and that also should include what drug this subject was assigned. So I'll need that information when I verify the CRF, if it's asked for, like a vial number. I've worked in oncology a lot, so the drug has a specific number. So what drug was assigned? Let's see. The other thing I want to know about the subjects is their status, whether they've been consented, enrolled, or discontinued. So there's a little bit of work with that. You have to make sure that the real status is reported correctly in data and in IWRS. So I kind of know where the subjects are intuitively or not intuitively, just because I'm intimate with the site and the subjects. But anyway, there has to be agreement between reality, between data, and between IWRS. So that's it with subjects in IWRS. The other component is study drug. So I run a report. And listen, one thing good about these vendors that we use is they typically have reports that we need and only what we need, and they're easy to generate and read. A lot more than our CTMS. The vendors portals are good. So my recommendation is when you get assigned to a study or you're new to a vendor, drill down 2 levels and see what you get. When you get to the landing page of the vendors portal, click on every link there and see what it brings you. And then on that page, click on every link there and see what you get. Sometimes you'll go down the rabbit hole and there's just a lot of stuff. I did that with data one time. There are just a lot of reports that are available, and I clicked on every one to see what was in there. What I found is that I didn't have access to a lot of the reports, which is cool. But anyway, drill down 2 levels and see where it gets you. There's a lot of good stuff in vendor portals, but you have to go looking for it. Okay, so for the IP, I run reports to see when IP was shipped to the study. And I want to find out whether that drug has been acknowledged by the study, by the site. And you can get both of those things typically in the report. The other thing that you can get out of vendor IWR reports is what drug was assigned to each subject. Another thing that you can run sometimes, depending on the vendor, is if you have to ship back drug. I used Fisher for one of my studies, and they are fabulous. You can run a report that will tell you exactly what vials are still at the site. You run the report, you verify it, and you ship it. It's wonderful. The other thing you can check out, run report in IWRS, is when the drug is about to expire. That's pretty big. And the last thing I do in IWRS, and this is a lower level priority, is what site staff has access to the portal. So if you don't know this already, the labor pool in clinical research is very fluid. A lot of people come and go. So obviously you want to make sure that people who don't need to have access don't have access. Okay. The next thing I do is pharmacy work. For preparation, I'll ask for a pharmacy appointment, and I do try to visit the pharmacy every time. Sometimes you get some weird stuff. Dan, we had an excursion. This has happened a couple times. Just bizarre stuff. Sometimes it's significant, sometimes it ain't. Thank goodness for decimal points. Another thing that I try to get at some point is their drug destruction SOP. So I want to say this. My prep checklist here that we're talking about has 70 items on it, which is a lot. It's time consuming. But some of these things you don't have to do every single time, like this one. Once you get a drug destruction SOP, you don't have to get it again. So what I do is I just yellow out that line for the subject, for the site. Obviously, I don't have to check that twice. But I should know what their SOP is. Some sites will retain empty files, some won't. Some, and I just have to read it because every site is different. That's pharmacy. CTMS. So there are a few things I do for CTMS. If I want to know what the action items are that are residual from the last visit, This is a subject for different deck plates, but I work on the action items between visits, so they don't get old. Anyway, so I work on them. But anyway, in terms of preparation for a visit, I run an action items report, so that way I know what action items are still outstanding. Another thing I do is I try to run a report of all the contacts from the site staff, periodically. I make an Excel worksheet out of it, and I send it to the coordinator, and I say, hey, do all these people still work for the study? Like I said before, the work pool is very dynamic. People come and go. Investigators, PIs, lab techs, data managers, they're coming and going. So we need to update our records. That's a thoughtful thing to do because the rest of our team, like the CRO and the vendor, they rely on that being accurate, and it's important because let's say the lab person leaves and we don't update the CTMS, then the communications from the sponsor will go to the wrong person. That's not good. The last thing I do, if this is appropriate, is to find out what supplies, like non-clinical supplies, have been shipped to the site, and then I'll ask the coordinator when I'm there if they've received it. So in another deck plates, I'll go over how I actually conduct my visit. Once again, it's pretty methodical. But one thing that I want to get out of the preparation is something that I call goals. I want to have a plan of attack of what I want to get done at the visit before I get to the visit. It's sort of like a target, a goal, a plan of the day. So anyway, as I'm going through the preparation here, I add to this cell in my visits worksheet. So that's CTMS. Oh, so the last thing I do is I open a whole bunch of documents, and I typically do this the morning of the visit before I leave the hotel. These are the documents that I want open on my laptop. I want the report, either the template, the thing I'm going to write the report on. I want that open. I want the protocol open. I want the monitoring tool open for each subject. I have a regulatory document tracker I'll talk about at another another deck plates, but I want that open. I want to have all the listings reports that I've run from data management. I want those all open. I have a worksheet that I'm using now. It's called Onsite, and I have it broken down into preparation, visit, and follow-up. They're basically just checklists, but I want that open before I get to the site. The data entry guidelines and the action items. So what I do is I open all those things, and then I don't close my laptop. I hibernate it or put it to sleep or whatever they call that. So those are the big things that I do in preparation for a visit. These are the smaller things. I want to make sure that the study coordinator's phone number is in my cell phone. If there are problems on getting into the office or logistics problems, I want to be able to call that person without having to open my laptop. If your CRO or your sponsor has a sort of like a regulatory document distribution portal, I go into it because there are a few things that are good there. One is that if this portal is used to communicate with the site staff, important things like amendments, upcoming data locks, IB updates, things like that, I want to make sure that those communications are in the site's correspondence files. What else? Hold on a second here. Another thing I want to know is what IND safety reports have been promulgated since the last monitoring visit. I want to make sure, because obviously I want to make sure the site has them and that they've processed them for submission to the IRB. And obviously for that, you have to know what their submission policy is. So those are the big things. Important correspondence, IND safety reports. So I have used a piece of hardware that we call ePro, and it stands for Patient Reported Outcome. And it's basically a tablet that the subject fills out independently without any assistance from the site staff. And they're sort of subjective things. Sometimes, and they're questionnaires. Sometimes they're very extensive, 30 questions, 15, 10. But they're sort of subjective. They're sort of like, here's an example. Do you feel more optimistic since you've started the study? Or do you have, are you glad that you entered the study? Do you have less pain? Sort of subjective things. So it's an electronic tool. I want to make sure that the data has been uploaded. And once again, I can go to the vendor's portal and find out if it has been uploaded. So one thing I've noticed is that these ePro tablets, big opportunity for deviations. It's not a part of the coordinator's typical routine, so they don't notice when it's missing. It's sort of cumbersome, and it's sort of a source, my sense is, for the subject, because it's, I've worked on oncology, and these people got big problems. And basically what we're doing is handing these old people a piece of hardware, which they don't really like, and we're basically saying, we're not going to give you the drug until you answer these questions. So, they don't like to do it. So anyway, be attentive to that. That's that. Pro goals inform. For lab. What I do for for lab preparation is that I email either the study coordinator or the lab manager, who's ever responsible, and I ask them to inventory their lab kits and include in that inventory the expiration dates. And then I'll go in after them at the visit and do it myself. But the site staff should know how many kits they have and when the expiration is. And my asking the question forces them to find out. I've had deviations and problems regarding this. It's not my favorite part of the job, but it is important. Going back to another deck plate session, the monitor's responsibility, we have to make sure that the site has the adequate resources, and lab kits are part of the resources. More on preparation. So I create monitoring tools for each of my subjects. Maybe I'll do a deck plates on how I create these things. Once again, they're very replete. Takes a lot of work, but it makes my job at the site easier because I understand things. So in terms of preparation for visits, I want to make sure that the monitoring tool is created. I have a timeline in each of the monitoring tools for when the subject was dosed, their adverse events, and their con meds. So it helps me understand that. Another thing I put in the monitoring tool is prohibited meds. For a couple of reasons. One, it forces me to interact with that information. I find that there's so much stuff that we have to learn that the more involved I become with the information, the better I know it. So instead of just reading the prohibited meds, if I write them down on a monitoring tool, it forces me to interact with that, and I know it better. So that's a big one, because sometimes the prohibited meds just really interfere with the mechanism of action of the drug, and it's sort of pointless. It's sort of like having your foot on the brake when you're driving. You know, we're giving them the gas, and we don't want them to be standing on the brake at the same time. So that's what I do for the monitoring tool. Another thing I do for preparation is to look at the emails from the site or from my studied management about things that have to be followed up with in at the site. So I'll talk about this maybe in another deck plates, but when I get emails that I need to follow up that email at the monitoring visit, I assign it a category, a color category. And if you don't know about categories, you might want to learn it. It's a really fast way of organizing emails. So I assign these teal, the color teal. So then I just sort for teal, and I know what action I need to take at the site based on monitoring emails. Another thing I do is I email the study coordinator or the regulatory document manager, and I say, I'm going to be there at 9 o'clock. Will you please have the 1572 and the delegation log available when I arrive? It just helps. They'll all say yes. That's part of how I do my job. On another deck plates, I'll tell you how I conduct the monitoring visit, but the 1572 and the delegation log are very important. So that's it for email. Regulatory. Not one of my favorite things, but like they say in the political world, it's pay to play. The regulatory documents have to be squared away, current, complete. So I have a regulatory document tracker. It's very busy, very labor intensive, very long. But I have it arranged so I can figure out what documents have expired, like lab certifications. I can't think of other examples right now, things that expire. I also use the tracker to keep track of what training has been done on each protocol amendment and each IB revision. So hopefully your team has a someone assigned who can help you with regulatory. Alrighty, I have a workbook that I call the Site Universal. I keep track of a lot of stuff. Each worksheet, I have several worksheets within that workbook. One thing that I keep track of is when a protocol has been promulgated, when an IB has been promulgated, when SAEs have happened, and I make sure that any follow-up that needs to be done has been done. Like for IB revisions, that the IRB has approved it. Same thing with amendments. In terms of SAEs, I want to make sure that the SAE has been submitted to the IRB and that I have inspected the records thoroughly. And another thing is consent forms. Make sure that on my timelines for each subject, I write down when an IRB revision has come out. I mean, an ICF revision has come out, and when it's been signed. That's it. Action item. For the monitoring plan, I do open the monitoring plan. I just look at it just in the data section because sometimes there are idiosyncrasies about what data needs extra attention, or depending on what kind of study you're on, sometimes there's what is it called? It's risk-based monitoring. In other words, you don't have to monitor 100% or verify 100%. So I just wanted to read through that. That's monitoring plan. Depending on what kind of software you use for the report itself, sometimes you can go into the report and write part of the report even before you get to the visit. So things like when the IRB annual review expires, enrollment updates. I can't think of a lot, but what you should do is go through your report template and find out what questions can be asked before you even get to the site, and answer those. Some sponsors do their metrics differently about when a report is due. Sometimes the clock starts when the report is started, and sometimes the clock starts at the date of the visit. So make sure you don't put yourself into report jail by being thorough. Alrighty, that's that. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is if you have a vendor to help manage your regulatory documents. I worked with a vendor called Viva. Viva is the vendor, I believe, and Vault was the product. So I think it was just an absolutely fabulous product because it was easy to find documents, really easy, and the reports that could be run were helpful. So your sponsor might ask you to do some sort of regulatory document verification. So obviously you have to run the report and do the work. There are other things that you might want to check to make sure that the first 1572 is in there, the first delegation log has been in there, is in there. Any protocol signature pages that have been should have been signed are in there. So anyway, this is another example of drill down 2 levels to see what you get. Vault, the opening screen was just fabulous. The reports, oh, there were lots of reports, lots and lots. I used only one. But if you've got the time and the curiosity, there might be other reports that you can generate that could be helpful for you. All right, so that's it for ongoing monitoring visit preparation.